How does someone so young discover secrets that escape theologians and mystics? What kind of love is so powerful it can change the world without ever leaving a small town? And why did Thérèse's little way become the path that millions would follow toward holiness? This is the story of Saint Thérèse of Lisieux, the little flower who proved that in God's kingdom, the smallest love can have the greatest impact. If you've ever felt too ordinary to make a difference, let this story show you the extraordinary power of simple love. Before we begin, consider this. What if the extraordinary is hidden in the most ordinary lives? That's the lesson Thérèse reveals. Hit like and subscribe for more stories that uncover holiness in the everyday. On the 2nd of January 1873, in the Norman town of Lisieux, France, a girl was born who would revolutionize Christian spirituality. Marie-Françoise Thérèse Martin entered the world as the youngest of 9 children in a family where holiness was as natural as breathing. Thérèse's parents, Louis and Zélie Martin, were extraordinary people living ordinary lives. Louis was a watchmaker who had once considered becoming a monk. Zélie was a lace maker who dreamed of being a nun. Together, they created a home that was essentially a monastery in miniature filled with prayer, sacrifice, and devotion to God. Thérèse was her father's absolute favorite, his little queen who could do no wrong. Louis would take her on long walks, buy her treats, and shower her with affection that might have spoiled any other child. But Thérèse absorbed this love not as entitlement but as a preview of divine love itself. When Thérèse was 4 years old, her world shattered. Her mother Zélie died of breast cancer, leaving behind 5 grieving daughters and a heartbroken husband. For Thérèse, this loss was devastating. The cheerful, confident little girl suddenly became hypersensitive, prone to tears, and pathologically dependent on affection. "The most beautiful time of my life ended when Mama went to heaven," Thérèse later wrote. "Then began the saddest period of my existence." The family moved to Lisieux. Thérèse's older sister Pauline stepped into the maternal role, but the damage was done. The little girl who had once been fearlessly confident now cried at the slightest criticism and needed constant reassurance. At age 9, Thérèse experienced another crushing blow. When Pauline entered the Carmelite convent, feeling abandoned again, Thérèse became physically ill with what appeared to be a nervous breakdown. For months, she suffered from seizures, hallucinations, and complete immobility. The crisis was resolved through what the family considered a miracle. As Thérèse lay near death, she looked toward a statue of the Virgin Mary and saw the figure smile at her. Instantly, she was completely healed. This early childhood, marked by intense love and profound loss, was preparing Thérèse for her unique calling. She was learning that genuine holiness begins not with heroic acts, but with the willingness to be loved by God, even when human love fails. But her greatest transformation was still to come. As Thérèse entered adolescence, she remained trapped in what she called her winter of trial, extreme emotional sensitivity that made normal life almost impossible. She cried constantly, needed endless reassurance, and seemed incapable of self-control. Her family worried that Thérèse would never develop the strength needed for religious life. How could someone so emotionally fragile survive convent discipline? How could someone so dependent on human affection learn to depend entirely on God? The transformation came suddenly in the year 1886, on Christmas Eve, when Thérèse was 13. The family had returned from midnight mass, and according to tradition, Thérèse's father was to fill her shoes with presents, a custom she had grown too old for but couldn't bear to abandon. As they climbed the stairs, Thérèse overheard her father say, "Thankfully, this is the last time we'll have to do this childish thing." Normally, such a comment would have sent Thérèse into emotional collapse. But something extraordinary happened instead. In an instant she later described as miraculous, Thérèse felt her hypersensitivity completely disappear. "I experienced a complete transformation," she wrote. "The work that I had been unable to accomplish in 10 years, Jesus accomplished in one instant." The change was immediate and permanent. The weepy, dependent child became a poised, confident young woman. Thérèse had discovered that true strength comes not from human effort, but from complete dependence on divine grace. This Christmas conversion marked the beginning of Thérèse's spiritual maturity. She began studying her faith seriously, developing intense devotion to Jesus and a burning desire to save souls. Thérèse's new maturity was tested when she learned about Henri Pranzini, a man condemned to death for triple murder. Pranzini was unrepentant and refused spiritual comfort. For Thérèse, this became a personal challenge, her first spiritual child, whom she was determined to save through prayer. She prayed intensely for Pranzini's conversion, offering all her spiritual exercises for his salvation. When execution day arrived, she waited anxiously for news. The report came that Pranzini had gone to the guillotine without repentance, but at the last moment, he had suddenly seized the crucifix and kissed it 3 times. "My first child had been given back to me," Thérèse rejoiced. She had discovered her vocation, to pray and sacrifice for the salvation of souls, especially those who seemed beyond hope. But her most impossible dream was still ahead. By age 14, Thérèse knew with absolute certainty that God was calling her to enter the Carmelite convent. But there was one enormous obstacle: her age. Canon law required women to be at least 21, and the Lisieux Carmelites had never accepted anyone younger than 17. Thérèse's response revealed the holy audacity that would characterize her spiritual life. If human authority wouldn't bend the rules, she would appeal to higher authority. She decided to ask the Pope himself for permission to enter Carmel at 15. Her opportunity came when her father planned a pilgrimage to Rome. The journey was Thérèse's first glimpse of the world beyond her sheltered upbringing, but nothing impressed her as much as discovering that even priests were ordinary human beings with flaws. The climactic moment came during a papal audience with Pope Leo XIII. Pilgrims were strictly forbidden to speak, but as Thérèse knelt to receive his blessing, she threw protocol to the wind. "Most Holy Father," she said in a clear voice, "in honor of your Jubilee, permit me to enter Carmel at 15. The Pope, startled, looked down at the young girl with kind eyes. "My child, do what the superiors tell you to do." But Thérèse was not deterred. "If you say yes, Holy Father, everyone will agree." Guards moved to remove her, but Leo XIII gestured for them to stop. He placed his hand on Thérèse's head and said prophetically, "Go in peace, my child. You will enter, if God wills it." 3 months later, on the 9th of April, 1888, Thérèse received permission to enter Carmel at the unprecedented age of 15. The impossible dream had become reality through holy audacity and divine providence. What she would discover behind those convent walls would change Christianity forever. On the 9th of April, the year 1888, 15-year-old Thérèse Martin walked through the Carmelite doors and disappeared from the world's view forever. But within those cloistered walls, she would discover spiritual truths that would transform Christianity itself. The Carmelite life was deliberately harsh, designed to strip away earthly comfort and force the soul to depend entirely on God. The nuns rose at 5 a.m., ate simple meals, observed strict silence, and spent hours in contemplation and labor. Thérèse adapted with surprising ease. She had found her true home, a place where her intense desire to love God completely could be satisfied. However, convent life brought Thérèse face to face with the reality that holiness doesn't make people easy to live with. The nuns were good women, but also human beings with quirks, jealousies, and annoying habits. One of her greatest trials was Sister Saint Pierre, an elderly nun who was both disabled and demanding. Every evening, Thérèse helped her walk from chapel to refectory, a task requiring enormous patience since the old nun moved slowly, complained constantly, and was never satisfied. But instead of enduring this duty grimly, Thérèse transformed it into pure love. She smiled warmly, listened patiently, and treated Sister Saint Pierre with such kindness that the difficult old nun came to consider Thérèse her favorite companion. Another crucial relationship was with Sister Marie of Gonzaga, the prioress who seemed to take special pleasure in humiliating Thérèse, criticizing her work and treating her with obvious disfavor. Again, Thérèse's response was revolutionary. Instead of resenting this treatment, she saw it as a gift from God. She not only accepted the harsh treatment, but actively sought ways to serve better. "I will love her so much," Thérèse wrote, "that she will be forced to love me in return." Through these daily challenges, Thérèse was developing what she called her little way, a path to holiness based not on heroic penances, but on perfect love expressed in the smallest details of everyday life. But her greatest spiritual discovery was yet to come. As Thérèse matured in religious life, she began developing a revolutionary approach to holiness that would change how millions understood their relationship with God. Her little way was born from profound personal struggle with traditional paths to sanctity. Reading saints' lives had always inspired Thérèse, but also discouraged her. The great mystics performed impossible penances, experienced dramatic visions, and accomplished heroic deeds clearly beyond her reach. She felt like a child trying to climb a steep staircase when her legs were too short. "I wanted to find a lift to take me straight up to Jesus," she wrote, "because I was too small to climb the difficult stairway of perfection." The breakthrough came when Thérèse discovered Isaiah's words, "Whoever is little, let him come to me." Suddenly, she understood that her weakness was not an obstacle to holiness, but the very means by which God wanted to lift her up. "The lift that must take me up to heaven is your arms, Jesus," she realized. "For this I do not need to grow. I must remain little, become even smaller." This insight revolutionized Thérèse's spiritual life. Instead of striving to become strong enough to earn God's love, she would remain deliberately small, allowing God to do everything for her. The little way had three essential elements: complete trust in God's mercy, total abandonment to God's will, and the practice of small sacrifices offered with great love. It was spirituality designed for ordinary people, people who would never be mystics or martyrs, but could still achieve perfect holiness through perfect love. Thérèse began teaching this approach to novices under her direction. Instead of encouraging dramatic penances, she showed them how to find God in daily life's smallest details. Miss no single opportunity of making some small sacrifice, here by a smiling look, there by a kindly word, she taught. Always do the smallest right thing, and do it all for love. Her little way was not merely psychology, but profound theological insight about God's love and human redemption. She understood that salvation comes through divine grace, and the proper human response is not achievement, but receptivity. "I will spend my heaven doing good on earth," she wrote. "I want to let fall a shower of roses." The world would soon discover just how powerful that shower would be. In 1896, at 23, Thérèse began experiencing tuberculosis symptoms, the disease that would kill her within 18 months. But even more devastating was a spiritual crisis that began simultaneously and would test every aspect of her little way. Thérèse had always possessed unshakable faith. Heaven seemed as real as the convent walls. But suddenly, without warning, that certainty vanished. She found herself plunged into what mystics call the dark night of the soul, spiritual dryness so complete she could no longer feel God's presence or believe in His existence. "I was enjoying such living faith," she wrote, "when Jesus permitted my soul to be invaded by thickest darkness." The thought of heaven became the subject of struggle and torment. For most people, such crisis might lead to despair. But Thérèse's response revealed the true depth of her little way. Instead of trying to regain lost feelings through spiritual effort, she chose to believe without feeling, trust without certainty, love without consolation. "I want to believe, even when I feel nothing," she declared. I will run toward my beloved Jesus even in darkness." This spiritual darkness lasted until her death, 18 months of believing without seeing. Yet Thérèse's exterior life showed no signs of interior struggle. She continued to smile, encourage others, and radiate joy. During this period, Thérèse wrote her autobiography at the prioress's request. The story of a soul revealed the inner workings of her little way with psychological insight and theological depth that amazed readers. As her physical condition deteriorated, Thérèse's spiritual insights became even more profound. She discovered that suffering, when united to Christ's suffering, became participation in world redemption. On the 30th of September 1897, after months of painful illness, Thérèse died at 24. Her last words were simple and characteristic. "My God, I love you." The young woman who had never left her convent was about to change the world through sheer power of perfect love. Within months of Thérèse's death, extraordinary things began happening. Reports of miraculous healings poured in from around the world. But even more remarkable was the immediate universal appeal of her little way to people of every background. The publication of The Story of a Soul in 1898 created a spiritual revolution. The book was translated into dozens of languages and distributed worldwide. Missionaries carried it to Africa and Asia, where converts who had never heard of Christian mysticism immediately understood Thérèse's message of childlike trust. What made her spirituality so universally appealing was its accessibility. Unlike complex mystical systems, the little way could be understood and practiced by anyone: illiterate peasants and university professors, busy parents, and cloistered nuns. Pope Pius X declared her the greatest saint of modern times. But real validation came from ordinary people who found in her example the encouragement they needed to seek holiness in their own circumstances. The Catholic Church moved with unusual speed toward canonization. She was canonized in 1925, just 28 years after death. In 1997, Pope John Paul II declared her a Doctor of the Church, recognizing her as authoritative teacher despite her youth and lack of formal training. Today, Saint Thérèse is venerated as patroness of missionaries, despite never leaving France, and of florists because of her promise to let fall a shower of roses. Her influence extends far beyond Catholicism. Protestants embrace her emphasis on grace over works, and even non-Christians find wisdom in her insights about love and trust. Modern psychology has validated many of Thérèse's insights about emotional health and spiritual development. Her understanding of childhood trust and mature faith anticipated discoveries made decades after her death. In an age of complexity and confusion, Thérèse offers gospel simplicity. Her little way reminds us that the path to God is not through achievement but surrender, not through strength but acknowledged weakness, not through earning love but accepting it as free gift. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux demonstrates that in God's kingdom, the last shall be first, and the smallest shall be greatest. The young woman who died unknown to the world had planted seeds of hope that continue blooming in every generation. Her shower of roses continues to fall, bringing healing, encouragement, and the promise that holiness is within reach of every human heart, willing to remain little in order to be lifted up by divine love. In a culture obsessed with self-improvement, Thérèse points to a different path, the way of confidence and surrender that leads to self-transcendence through union with infinite love.